What happened to Carlos? I didn't realize he was abandoning us.
You didn't know either. I just
didn't.
texted him. Where the hell are you?
Got a little crisis of the American Republic here. From New York Times Opinion, I'm Ross Douthat.
I'm Michelle Cottle.
I'm Lydia Polgreen.
And this is Matter of Opinion. So, it's great to be back with both of you guys, though sadly, Carlos isn't with us this week. He is on vacation, so we don't quite have the full gang back together. But honestly, I think that's okay, because it's a pretty slow news week, guys.
Nothing going on.
No.
Nothing but green.
I'm honestly not sure what we should talk about. Are you guys... I've been taking care of a baby. Has anything happened in the last week or so that's piqued your interest? Elections in New Zealand, maybe?
It feels like we're all taking care of a baby, and that baby is American democracy.
Stop. Stop.
I'm sorry.
The baby's got colic or something.
See, I thought you were going to say, and that baby is President Joe Biden.
No.
But you did... No, but you were even... It was even better. All right, so... Let's be serious. Today, we're going to try and get a handle on what is actually going on with American democracy, the Democratic Party, and the effort to force, or at least desperately but gently prod Joe Biden out of the presidential race.
Nudge.
A gentle nudge. And maybe we can get into what this moment tells us about the strength of political parties. But really, there's only one place to start, which is asking both of you, what the hell, should the Democratic Party do about its presidential nominee?
So talking with folks around the party, I think that there is a widespread sense that some tipping point has been reached, but the actual logistics are really problematic.
So let me stipulate, we are recording this on the morning of Thursday, July 11th, which means that we are, for people following the timeline, searching for the tipping point, we are speaking to you after the George Clooney op-ed, both calling for Joe Biden to drop out and reporting, most crucially, that at the major fundraiser that Clooney himself helped organize for Biden a few weeks ago, he was basically just as bad as he was at the presidential debate. We are speaking to you before Joe Biden's NATO press conference. So apologies if something even more dramatic, if the tipping point has tipped further, but that's where we are right now.
All right, let's be clear. The Biden people had been pitching kind of a triple crown of proof that he could function. One was going to be the rally in Wisconsin last week. The second was going to be the sit down with George Stephanopoulos. And the third was going to be this, what they're calling a big boy press conference for NATO. And the reality is, there's nothing that these proof of life things were going to prove unless something really horrible happened. They're just a way to buy time while everybody tries to figure out what the hell is going on and what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to be having conversations with Democratic insiders. This is not my world. But I think that the just overall sense of total panic and disarray, and honestly, I think even if one does talk to people on the quote-unquote inside of this, I'm not at all convinced that there is anything to be known. I've always believed in Occam's razor, which is that the simplest explanation is the most likely. And I think that the most likely explanation is that nobody really knows how to make this situation go away.
And I think the problem in part is that there is no good outcome. There is no path forward without massive risk and uncertainty. And that just makes it all the more unclear.
But those are two distinct statements, right? Like, clearly there's no path forward without massive risk and uncertainty. But the reality is that before the grand unveiling of the first presidential debate, Joe Biden was not winning this election. Joe Biden was losing this election. Indeed, before there was the triple crown of the proof of life tour, the Biden team unfathomably... Sorry, I added a syllable.
Can't even get that out.
I added a syllable to unfathomably because it was so unfathomable in hindsight, regarded the first presidential debate as a really good chance to shake up the race. And help,
it did.
And it did, right? And help Joe Biden regain ground, which he seemingly did not.
Maybe not.
But so from the point of view of the Democrats, I mean, there is upside, potentially. In fact, there is a potential good outcome here for the Democrats. We don't know exactly what it is, but there is an outcome with a different candidate who polls better than Joe Biden. That is a possible outcome.
It is a possible outcome, but the odds of that candidate going on to win in the general, getting them in position in time without destroying party unity and having everybody just like in kind of ongoing turmoil, those are some pretty like long odds.
I mean, look, I guess I'm a little bit less pessimistic about the ability to identify and run a new candidate if that were to be necessary. It seems pretty clear that that is now necessary. There is time. Like, let's not forget, and obviously we have very different political systems. You know, we just saw two of our most important allies, France and the United Kingdom, very quickly do campaigns for general elections and produce big seismic results that I think were very interesting and told us a lot about these places. Again, we're a very different political system. I understand that, and our political parties aren't really set up to work in that way. But boy, it certainly seems worth trying. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party, and we can talk about specific candidates. I was with Kamala Harris in Dallas yesterday and happy to talk about that. But no, I don't think it's too late. I don't think that this is hopeless or lost at all. Donald Trump is a very, very, very bad and weak candidate. So I just think that, having an effective candidate who can actually prosecute this election, tipping my hand a little bit there, would leave us in a very different place than we are right now.
I think one of the things that's making Democrats nervous, though, is that, up until very recently, Kamala was polling worse than Biden. And even now, she is, as I understand it, looking a little better, but they still don't see her as a good bet in swing states. I mean, Kamala has a long way to go to make anybody feel comfortable. Now, that said, I think you're absolutely right. I think something has to be done. And the general consensus right now is that Kamala is, if not the only viable option, at least overwhelmingly the most likely option. But that doesn't make any option great.
Well, so let's talk for a minute more about what is to be done, right? Because we've had this kind of whipsaw just in the last few days of, moments when people were saying, oh, the dam is breaking. Just like the walls were closing in was the watchword of Trump's first term. Every week, the walls were closing in. Now it's the dam is breaking, and then we
love our infrastructure.
It's infrastructure week. And maybe it doesn't, right? But you have a day where a bunch of Democrats say things about how they're losing confidence in Biden. The media is sort of full tilt against him, I would say, at this point, and people say, oh, this is unsustainable. But then the next day, a bunch of Democratic politicians say, we're sticking with Joe, and, the Biden White House puts out a long letter, a detailed letter saying, we're not going anywhere, and everyone says, oh, I guess they're going to stick with Biden. And then Nancy Pelosi goes on Morning Joe and says, we're really just waiting for the president to make a decision. And everyone says, well, that means she wants him to change his decision. And so
the situation is highly fluid.
But let's try and make it concrete. What actually has to happen for Joe Biden to step aside? Is it just about what's happening in his own mind and his inner circle? Is there a kind of Pelosi, Obama, Clooney tipping point where
Schumer, don't forget about Chuck Schumer.
Right, where the sort of Republican wise men going to Richard Nixon and telling him it's over kind of moment.
So if you talk to some of the folks who are on the kind of in the midst of this, the talk is of collective action. You need some kind of group show of it's time, Dad, give me the keys. But then you are also dealing with a president who, for all his kind of genial, avuncular, papa sweetness, also has a real defiant streak and gets his back up. And that seems to have been what has happened with the family in general. We hear talk of the first lady being no, you're going to get in there and fight all the way. Hunter showing up at the White House.
Don't forget, Chief of Staff Hunter Biden.
This is
he's there, man.
A bunker mentality for the ages. It's they sat down and they're what could we do to make this look even worse than it already? Oh, let's bring in Hunter. Great idea. So you've got this defiant bunker mentality going on, and most people at this point think that there is not a gentle way to get him to go, that it's going to take a bit of ugliness.
I mean, we've already invoked George Clooney, so I feel like we can talk about Hollywood. And I think that one of the challenges here, both for Democrats themselves and I think sort of the broader kind of Democratic voting population, is this kind of weird split screen view that we have of politics. And I think of it as sort of, we have this habit of either idealizing it a la the West Wing, right? Or being totally cynical about it a la Veep, right? It's either one or the other. And I do think that, we kind of need to get ourselves out of Hollywood fantasy world and think about, I don't know, just brass tacks, practical, how do we move this forward here? And I don't know who the grownups are that are having that conversation and aren't indulging in the kind of, fantasy or cynicism.
Well, one of the practical things they are looking at is they are looking quite intently at how this is going to affect down ballot races. Again, back to the idea that a lot of these folks seem to have just thrown up their hands and given up on the presidency. So then the question is, not that you're necessarily having them lose, but if they lose, is it better to lose with Biden? And what will that do is that going to take down Senate races, House races, all these down ballot races? And they are sitting around crunching numbers to some degree.
I mean, and the question then is like, we keep being told this is the most important election in American history and the stakes are life or death and all of these kinds of things. Why isn't anyone acting like it? I mean, that's my question.
Possibly because they didn't actually believe it. For instance, our colleague Ezra Klein stirred up a lot of strong responses on social media when he went on the Bulwarks podcast and said he was talking to Democrats who said, look, I don't actually think Donald Trump is an existential threat to American democracy. And so that's why I'm not as worried about this as some people are. Clearly, there are Democrats who do not take the view that a second Trump term is going to end democracy. Correctly, in my view, but that's obviously not the line that the Democratic Party has officially taken. But let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. I want to get back to, Michelle, you talked about sort of ugliness, right, and directness. Let's say we get to the point where through private intervention or public intervention, everybody knows that Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Barack Obama, not just his stalking horse, George Clooney, who I keep bringing up, but Barack Obama himself, all think Joe Biden has to go. But Joe Biden says, guys, guess what? I just looked at the latest poll from the Washington Post, which I'm staring at conveniently right now. It shows me in a statistical tie with Donald Trump, even after that bad debate. Why should I step aside? I don't care what you say. I won the primaries. You're trying to thwart the will of the voters. What happens then?
I mean, it depends on how public they're willing to get. Like Barack Obama comes out.
Let's say they get completely public. Barack Obama says, it's done, Joe.
I mean, I think the thing to remember is that in the 2020 election, Bernie Sanders was mounting this kind of insurgent campaign and, people were excited about him. And, there was just a lot of excitement about Bernie. Bernie was great, right?
Love the guy.
Apparently,
no,
apparently he would have won.
I like Bernie.
Right? No, I know you do. I know you. You're not being sarcastic. I believe you. I believe you. But what's interesting is that the Democratic Party was able to essentially create an outcome that was desired by party elites, right? Which was that Joe Biden would be the nominee.
Well, let's be clear, though. It wasn't just the idea that this was like party elites versus the base is only if you're looking at the activist, young, progressive base. It's not if you're looking at the heart of the Democratic Party, which is older Black voters who loved Joe Biden. And that's who could cost you if, you have Obama and folks say it's time.
And that base is well represented in the thinking and personalities of Democratic Party elites, right? And so they were able to create the outcome that they felt would most likely lead to victory. And it turns out that they were right. Joe Biden did win. You know, we could talk about counterfactuals in which a different candidate might have won, you know, who knows? But they were able to make that happen in 2020, right? Despite the fact that Joe Biden did not necessarily seem destined to win the primary. And I think that the difference now is that we're dealing with an incumbent president, right? And that creates a different situation. But I don't know that it creates the same kind of situation, the kind of hostage taking that you're seeing in the Republican Party, where there really just isn't any option if you want to remain in the Republican Party other than to be loyal to Donald Trump.
So I think there is a clear difference there in that at the various points when the Republican Party as a party could have moved against Trump, whether in the primary or after the Access Hollywood tape came out, when some people were coming out and saying Trump should drop out and Mike Pence should be our nominee. In both of those circumstances, there was a big faction in the Republican Party, not a majority at that point, that saw Trump as the only guy who could deliver something that they wanted. And for some of them, it was fighting the libs. For some of them, it was trade policy and immigration and protectionism and so on. And that doesn't seem to exist with Biden now. There are people who like Joe Biden. There's some kind of Joe Biden base. But I don't think anybody is waking up in the morning and saying, only with Joe Biden can I have the Democratic Party that I want. So that definitely is a strength that Trump had in resisting party attempts to move against him that Biden doesn't have. And I agree that the maneuverings in that primary were evidence that the Democratic Party is a more functional party than the Republicans. I think that certainly was true then, probably still true now. I'm just trying to get you guys to respond to what I think is the reasonable response to my argument, which is, again, how do you get him to go if he just says no?
It's not entirely clear to me what you're asking. Are you asking who is going to take to the convention floor? And I don't understand what you're asking in terms of if it's going to be a fight at the convention, obviously you would have to have party elders who had these discussions. But I'm not sure exactly beyond that what you're asking. Are you asking what levers need to be pulled, or who's going to pull them?
I know we don't need to leap all the way ahead to the convention. I guess what I'm trying to discern is 2 days ago, a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people were saying, guess what? It's over. Biden's staying in. The Democrats are just going to reconcile themselves to it. And so at this moment, Thursday morning, it seems much more likely that he will be pushed out. I'm trying to discern if there's a world where the pendulum just has to swing back, where Biden says, I'm not going. People look around and say, well, we'd have to mount a rival candidate at the convention. That seems unimaginable. And so people just sort of tiptoe away from the statements they've made in the last week or so, and we just continue with Biden as the nominee.
That's certainly what they're hoping. They're hoping that they can make it look as painful and difficult as possible to move forward with any alternatives. That's the message that they're putting out there. They want to stop defections. They are desperate for people in the Senate and House and other party eminences not to come forward. Last night we saw Vermont's Peter Welch become the first Democratic senator to actually call for Biden to drop out of this race.
Truly a household name.
They want
Senator Peter Welch.
They are concerned, as you noted earlier, that something like that is going to break the dam and it's going to come out. So it's just too fluid to know.
To me, this has been the core of the case for Kamala Harris, is that, you get sort of a number of things at the same time. It's been absolutely excruciatingly annoying to me for people to argue that, if you pass her over, you're going to lose Black voters, and that's why she needs to be picked, or it's quote unquote her turn. That's why she needs to be picked. That's just utter horseshit. None of those actually hold any weight at all. To me, I think one of the most foundational reasons that Kamala Harris is the choice is that precisely the problem that Ross is talking about. You need to create a bridge to a dignified end of this for Joe Biden. And whatever internally, people may think about Kamala Harris's electability and things like that, I will argue that case as well. But I think it's really important to remember that she is the vice president. He chose her to be his successor if he were unable to continue serving. There is a way to tell the story of his, magnanimously and nobly stepping aside after a single, even after all of this, it will be forgotten. His recalcitrance will be forgiven and folded into a long history of bullheadedness. But I think to me, that is one of the most important and fundamental aspects of the Kamala Harris situation that makes it the most likely and cleanest way to get out of this mess.
On that note, appreciated by all Kamala Harris fans throughout this fine land, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit bigger picture about what the situation tells us about the role of political parties in American democracy right now. So stay with us. And we're back. So we touched a couple times earlier on the parallels and non-parallels between this situation and the situation that Republicans found themselves in 2016 with Donald Trump. A different form of unfitness for the presidency, let's say, but a similar situation in that you had a either near nominee or eventual nominee who a lot of party actors really wanted to get rid of and couldn't figure out how to do it. And I'm interested in what this says about the nature of political parties. But I'm also curious for both of you, my more liberal friends, whether going through the last couple weeks as a liberal American has given you any more sympathy for what Republicans went through and how they ended up with Donald Trump as their nominee.
Absolutely not. I mean, I just think that the no, absolutely not. Look,
good.
The Democratic Party has a long tradition of policing the parameters of acceptable candidates, right? And of having a leadership that represents for better or worse, I think the center of where the party is at. And we've ended up with these, certainly since the victory of Barack Obama, which I think was genuinely a surprise that built in the 2008 primary. I think that there has, for better or worse, been a very carefully choreographed process that ended disastrously in 2016 with Hillary Clinton's defeat. It ended triumphantly in 2020 with Joe Biden winning the presidency. And I just think that it's a tough comparison to make because, again, we're dealing with an incumbent president who is currently in office. And that was always going to be a very hard thing to maneuver somebody in that position out. Donald Trump, why would anybody think that this man should have been president? He was a reality television star and a failed businessman, he was a carnival barker and somebody who just had really no institutional story to tell about why he should be in power, right? And so I just don't think that there's any parallel there really at all.
Michelle, do you have any thoughts before I try and offer a couple?
Oh, I'm so eager for those thoughts. But I do think that you really can't compare rooting out a sitting president and dealing with an open primary. The structures of American politics often come up around a sitting president, and then you have to unwind all of that if your own party is trying to make a change in the primary. It's a really kind of complicated situation as opposed to
very
an open
difficult
primary.
Yeah, right. Unlike let's say the Republican position after the Access Hollywood tape dropped, right? When there was at that point, it's true, Donald Trump was not the president of the United States. However, he was the nominee of the party against the desire of many party actors who had tried and failed to mobilize along the lines that Lydia describes against him to get another nominee. I think there's been an assumption among a lot of liberals and Democrats that the lesson of Trump's ascent was that the Republicans who sort of tried to stop it and sort of gave up and went along with the party, proved themselves to be bad people when they did that. And fortunately, the Democratic Party is full of good people. And good people would find a way to stop an unfit president, whereas the bad people in the Republican Party did not. And that's what I'm not saying you guys think that, per se. Obviously, you both, know and like some Republicans. But I feel like at least some Democrats might be rethinking that perspective slightly, as they themselves recognize that, in fact, when you have someone who won a primary election who is unfit for the presidency, it's not an easy thing to figure out how to get him out. And you do get a lot of people, and clearly a lot of Democrats would accept a path of least resistance right now. Not all of them, but there are a lot of Democratic office holders, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out and said, Biden's the nominee, let's stop talking about it, right?
But that may have been tactical, right? I mean,
of course, right? There's always a plan. Trust the plan.
Well, I don't. I mean, listen. I feel like the phrase "blue anon" has crept into the lexicon in a way that's blue MAGA is also a thing. But look,
right. But there's a thing for a reason, right? Which is that people feel a strong loyalty to their parties and their leaders, and it's hard to get rid of them.
Yes. No. Hold on. It's a thing on Twitter, right? What happened in 2016 is that Donald Trump, in a competitive primary, right, was the nominee of the party, right? The difference with 2024 is that we have an incumbent Democratic president, and there was not a competitive primary, right? I mean,
why was that, Lydia?
I mean, because I think traditionally...
Oh, now, Ross, come on. You're not going to pretend that a re-election campaign is a choice as opposed to a coronation in every single case in modern politics.
Why wasn't there a primary against Donald Trump that was vigorous and open?
Because it's really hard to get rid of a incumbent, or in Trump's case, a near incumbent. I guess I'm curious in that it does seem like there were a number of Democrats who were aware of the problem that has been made manifest in the last month and tried to point it out, led by my hero, Representative Dean Phillips, future statesman. We laugh, but Dean Phillips was right. And other people were right. People have been pointing out this problem that Joe Biden has, where he is manifestly too old to be president. Okay, let's say it hasn't been apparent for his entire presidency, but it has become increasingly apparent, and many people have pointed it out, and lots of people in the Democratic Party have been in denial about it, right?
And again, we get back to the question of, lots of people thought there were problems with Reagan as he was running for re-election. And there were moments in his debate where he froze, where he absolutely humiliated himself, and then he came back in the next debate and proved himself. Now, I do not think that's what's happening here with Joe Biden, but I do think a lot of Democrats, until this meltdown, could tell themselves that people were overreacting. A lot of people were not seeing this. And we have no real... part of what's got people so upset is there is a question of how much and how many people knew this was a problem and to what degree. And until you have it shoved in your face...
George Clooney knew. George Clooney knew.
Ross, listen, I think that it's worth thinking for a minute about what just happened. And I know I'm always the person who's bringing up the international examples. It's worth thinking about what just happened in France, right? In the French election, in the second round, which a friend of mine called a kind of two-factor verification for democracy, which, might not be such a bad idea, something we could think about. But what I took away from that election was that that the political parties that did not want the far right to come to power felt that they were in a truly break glass situation, and the left and the center came together in what will be a messy and not even really an alliance. But, they blocked it because it really was a break glass situation that people didn't want to see happen. And to me, the question for the Democratic Party is, what coalitions are you willing to make, and what glass are you willing to break in order to ensure that Donald Trump does not become president again? And if you truly, deeply believe that Joe Biden cannot win this, then you cannot in good conscience be standing there saying that, well, it's up to him to decide. That's just not an acceptable answer to the question. So I guess, I don't entirely disagree with you, Ross. I mean, I think that there is, there's always going to be cynicism. There's always going to be calculation. You have so many people who want to be president, and that's just the nature of politics. But to me, the fundamental question is this a break glass situation or is it not? And can you rise above those petty self-interests in order to do the thing that you have been telling us is the most important thing to do, which is to defeat Donald Trump?
And one of the things it looks like you're thinking about, Ross, is the parties are weak compared to historically. They feel like they're everywhere and they have certain roles that they play, especially kind of organizing voting in the states, but they are completely kind of stripped from what they used to be. I mean, in part because the money is not reliant on the parties anymore. You have a different funding mechanism, and politics runs a lot on money. So you don't have the gatekeeping that you used to have in terms of, as Lydia talks about, policing the parameters.
Right. And that I have a number of follow-up questions about the morality of how Democrats have proceeded up till now with Joe Biden, but I think we'll have a chance to talk about them more. It seems like in both of your arguments, there's basically a case that the political parties are, in a way, too small d democratic, right? That it would have been a better world if Republican elites had had a mechanism to veto a candidate in 2016 who was only getting 35% of the vote. And now it is the world that both of you want and are confident we will get, that party elders can just sort of step in and figure out a mechanism to replace the man who won all the primaries, right? So stronger parties is.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Are you approaching the Joe Biden elite versus voter thing? Because that's an episode. That's an entire episode in
That's an entire
of
episode
itself.
of its own.
The idea that the voters have not been expressing this is a fantasy that the Biden folks are pitching.
I guess my point is just that there is no. I mean, apart from actual fantasies about running like a lightning round primary, there is no mechanism now. There is no mechanism now where the will of the Democratic primary electorate is going to be expressed in the choice of nominee.
I mean, I think that, the future that I would want is actually a much more competitive and small d Democratic Party and Republican Party for that matter. But, I think we had a very, very Democratic Republican Party that clearly and resoundingly voted for Donald Trump in 2016 to be the nominee. And now again has voted for him to be the nominee in 2024. So, there's no question that democracy on its own can produce outcomes that many, many people will find deeply unsettling and uncomfortable, right? And so maybe we need something a little bit like our Constitution, which is some way to temper the will of the majority with the wisdom of the ages.
That is beautiful. That is such beautiful statement.
All right. Well, on that note, I think that, there will be a lot more to say about all of these issues.
No, we've solved it. We're done.
When we reconvene. So
I'm going to go have my heart-to-heart with the president, and then we're going to be all done.
That's right. We're sending. Actually, that's what we're doing. We are
now.
Sending Lydia and Michelle. I should say that Biden is famous for saying he doesn't. None of the pundits believed in him, and so on. I was actually the author of the Biden endorsement when everyone was asked to pick a Democratic primary candidate from the stable of New York Times opinion writers back in 2020. I wrote the piece saying the Democrats should nominate Joe Biden. So I feel that I'm actually well positioned to go have the heart-to-heart that the president needs.
Our man on the inside, Ross Douthat.
That's right.
Good luck, Ross.
All right, guys, great talking to you, and we will talk again very, very soon.
Bye, guys.
Right. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you for all of your emails and voicemails in the last couple of weeks. We know it's a crazy time and that everyone has a lot of thoughts, and we want to keep hearing from you. So if you have a question you think we ought to consider in this capital H historic moment, please share it with us in a voicemail by calling 212-556-7440 or by emailing us at matterofopinion@nytimes.com. And we might just respond to you in an upcoming episode. Matter of Opinion is produced by Phoebe Lett, Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, Derek Arthur, and Andrea Betanzos. It's edited by Jordana Hochman. Our fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Original music by Isaac Jones, Amin Sahota, Efim Shapiro, Carol Sabaro, Sonia Herrero, and Pat McCusker. Mixing by Pat McCusker and Carol Sabaro. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. Our executive producer is Annie Rose Strasser.